Hi all, for our notable game today, let's have a look at another game for the evolution of chess style, looking at David Bronstein, who was considered by many as one of the best attacking players of the 40s to the 70s, along with Tao and Paul Keres. Of course, no one sees combinations like Nesmetanov, according to Mikhail Botvinnik. He should be noted as well. But I have a treat for you, because this game is David Bronstein against Paul Keres in the Budapest Candidates tournament of 1950. So this is to help decide the challenger to Mikhail Botvinnik. This tournament, very, very important tournament. David Bronstein, playing white, kicks off with e4. Paul Keres plays e5. We go into a Roy Lopez. Standard Roy Lopez. So far, pretty standard. Pretty standard so far. After castles here, there's two very popular moves, c3 or h3. And you might think c3 and h3. h3 stops a potential pin on g4 later. c3 is constructing d4. So they're kind of actually logically related, because if you think about it, if later black gets the pin, he's exerting pressure on d4. And in fact, c3 here, d6, h3 is the most popular here, just to show that in Lightbook. So h3 is going to be followed up usually by c3. They're one and the same thing here. This is the most popular move here. They're part of the same thing to establish a center with d4 without the annoying pin. In this game though, there's a sideline gambit which is really important in this position. So for all dynamic aggressive gambiteers, club players, you know what it's like. It's easier to attack. Much easier to attack, much easier to have the initiative. So you don't need to play so classically as either c3 or h3. You can actually play d4 straight off the bat. There's a very aggressive idea here. d6. And now without h3, just actually supporting the center now. c3 inviting the pin, bishop g4, and in this position it looks as though d4 should be supported. This is the most common popular move. You'll note here that that pawn is not hanging there. There's a bishop d5 with a slight advantage to white. It's not actually so clear that it's winning a piece or anything because of this continuation. But it's thought to be a little bit better for white, this line. So it's not actually winning a piece. It's kind of playable almost. Knight takes e4 after bishop e3. But bishop e3 is not played in this game. We see an aggressive gambit instead. h3, just saying to black, take my center pawn. So bishop takes f3, well, after taking on f3. E takes d4, winning a center pawn. The queen just goes back. We have d takes c3, knight takes c3. So elements of the Scotch game. What's happening here? White's got the bishop pair. Black's a pawn up, obviously. This bishop looks particularly dangerous on the diagonal at the moment. It's evicted from that diagonal. Goes back to c2. Is it going to be useful on this diagonal? We've seen a prior notable game of Nesmetanov where he actually played c5 as black in this position and countersacked a pawn later, using that c5 pawn to reroute the knight to d4. That was in a Nesmetanov game. Paul Keres in this position doesn't play c5, which is actually the more common move, it seems, in this position, to play c5 here. Instead we see rook e8. Now white plays f4. And this looks a little bit on the risky side because he hasn't actually done anything about b4, which would seem to weaken e4. Black plays his b4 here. Knight d5. We have knight takes d5. Queen takes d5, looking to win the knight, but that's protected. The queen goes back to d3 as though e5 is on the cards now with a simple battery against h7. So it looks fairly straightforward for white. As you might expect, when you gambit, you get some straightforward initiative and direct pressure sometimes. Now against this e5, black played g6 here, blunting this diagonal. White now plays Kh1, getting off this potentially dangerous and troublesome diagonal. Bishop f8. And we see now rook f1. And you might think, well, the classic downside of playing for f5 is you're always loosening the e5 square. Is this really on the cards, f5 and maybe f6 later, or fg? We see bishop g7. And it also looks with bishop g7 that white is now tied down. Can't move this bishop. Surely b2 is going to drop. He actually plays bishop here, hitting b4. And it's a little bit unwise, it seems, for black to take on b2 here. After rook a b1. This would be pleasant enough for white, this position. Still a pawn down, but with pressure. This position here is okay for white. So black actually now plays c5. So it seems as though black's still a pawn up. Where is the compensation? Is David Bronstein being overly creative with this gambit line? One slight issue with c5 is picked up. There's a slight weakness of the diagonal, and that's picked up here. We see a forcing move, bishop a4. And this is actually of strategic importance, this nuisance move, or of tactical importance, you could argue. Because where actually does the rook go here? We've classically said that anytime you play f5 you're weakening e5, but this has changed the conditions slightly. On rook e7, which wasn't played, the rook actually went to f8. Is this so good? f5 is almost playable here, threatening both f6 and bishop g5. Almost. Might not be the absolute best move according to the engines, just protecting the pawn and waiting for f5 next move. But it's slightly improved the circumstances for f5 because we've got a tempo gainer here. We can gain a tempo here, bishop g5, and that has changed the conditions now where white might have more prospects than he would have. So bishop a4 is a very useful use of that bishop. Maybe the rook should have indeed gone to e7 despite seemingly a target on e7. It seems as though that is a viable option here technically. It went all the way back just home to f8 instead. We see now the pawn being protected. Now the queen goes offside. This looks as though this might be a little bit suspect just from a practical point of view. It's another piece away from the king. Major piece away from the king. And f5 is very, very tempting. And it is played. Threatening to just squish the bishop. Putting it back on h8. The bishop goes to d4. And then we have queen g3. White does seem to be generating compensation, attacking compensation here. Knight c4. And we have bishop h6. The bishop moves away from that attack to attack the rook. And it's pretty dangerous around here now. Does the rook want to move? This bishop might actually flip back to b3. And you'll note this diagonal would be pinning f7. The bishop actually went back to g7. And this looks a little bit odd and dangerous. Because you don't really want to exchange off your dark square defensive bishop like this in general. So the question that's begging to be asked here, is it really so bad to move the rook? Actually, it can't move to e8 because it can be taken there. Where can the rook move to? Let's just check this position. The engine is suggesting just to take on b2 and actually sacrifice the rook might be a good idea. This exchange attack, because at least dark squares are okay. Black's got 2 pawns for the exchange, so that might be an idea here. Just knight takes b2, knight e5 is another idea. Again, willing to sacrifice the exchange. But in the game we see bishop g7, and this is really, really kind of unbelievable for Paul Keres to do, actually. Maybe the seriousness of the tournament or the occasion is clinging on to material a bit more than he should have. He should have maybe taken the opportunity to offer the exchange sack. I mean, if the rook had just moved off, let's see the potential carnage. If the rook goes here, we can just consider taking there or taking on g6 first. If the rook moves to d8, let's imagine d8, then yes, bishop b3 is potentially dangerous. But also, f takes g6 might actually be more incisive here. F takes g6. This position here with that diagonal is pretty dangerous. If black had played hg, in this position there's a crusher, a bone crusher actually, which may have been seen, this stuff might have been seen by Keres. Can you see there's a bone crushing move in this position? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, starting from now, or a king's crushing move. Rook takes f7 is an absolute murder. This position. So like this, bishop g5. Yeah, it's just carnage. And if the king goes over here, then there's queen takes g6. And there's rook f7. It's mating. It's going to be mating. These lines are always dangerous with the rook moving. Okay, let's go with the improvement fg. This is good for white as well. This position, the idea rook takes d4 coming up to weaken black. So what does black actually do? Say like this, bishop b3. This looks horrible for black. This position, rook takes d4 will weaken the dark squares by force. And here white has killer ideas. On this diagonal, it's just murderous. If black doesn't get rid of the queens here, then what happens? Queen e6 check, and the bishop is coming to that diagonal with murderous effect. So yeah, these lines demonstrate that it's a difficult position, but it seems from an engine point of view, just sacrifice the exchange, just give up that rook. Knight takes b2 or knight e5. This should be okay, barely, although this position might be inferior to knight takes b2. It seems as though white's got adequate compensation here. If we look at this for a moment. This is adequate compensation. If black plays too casually, white's still got good attacking pressure. So we reach a key point actually, and that's why I wanted to labour this position. It's a key point. It seems really, just in principle, really a dangerous thing to do, what Paul Keres did, putting the bishop back here to have it exchanged off. Now, it's so tempting, it's absolutely tempting just to snap off that bishop and get a formed pawn on f6. And you can't blame David Bronstein for doing that. But it seems technically the strongest move is actually queen h4, which would require nerves of steel to actually play instead of this very, very tempting continuation bishop takes g7. On queen h4, black is by force getting an inferior position, for example like this, squish the bishop. This is just better for white, this position, and will be winning the exchange. If the rook moves here, then we got bishop takes e8. If the queen didn't come back, say f6, then black's getting smashed after bishop b3. This position is absolute wreckage for black on the diagonal. So yeah, it seems after queen h4, queen coming back would be one of the strongest. Yeah, if bishop going back there, then actually bishop b3 is even stronger than taking the exchange. In this position, is absolute carnage after rook f6. Yeah, black's king has had it. There's issues like rook takes g6. So yeah, so queen h4, this position here is pretty critical, but it just ends up being better for white. Okay, so bishop takes g7 was played, which is really dangerous as well. f6 check, queen g5. So going into h6, the classic g7 mate. But there's also an idea of rook f4, a rook lift. And if ever rook g8, there's an idea of a queen sack for rook h4, which will be mating. Because when the king is hemmed in by the rook, then that is a standard mating pattern. And David Bronstein must have seen this pattern many, many times before. It seems in this position, if black is to be able to hold this position against these menacing threats, there's only kind of one way to apparently do it, which I find really quite amusing from a technical perspective. The engine suggests that black may have technically an equal position with only one rook move, rook fb8. And you might find this slightly mysterious. What? Because the idea is queen h6, rook g8, and if we go for the rook lift with the threat of queen takes h7 and rook h4, black has g5. And if we go here, queen g5, then black, and if black has to basically go back here, waiting. This move. Anywhere else with a rook here would seem to be a problem, actually. I kid you not. If rook gc8, white has bishop d7, and this changes the picture of the g5 defense completely. Like this. For example, the rook going there, you'd think, what's the significant difference? I'll show you. Queen h6, rook g8, rook left for queen takes h7 threatened. g5, bang, bishop f5 is the difference. So the bishop coming like this, zigzag, is a killer. This is absolutely winning for white now. Queen g7, checkmate. So yeah, it seems this is really amusing, but as a technical defense, rook going to b8 in this position. Nothing else will do. And also, I mean, just to show you, okay, but why is nothing else doing here? Sorry, after queen g5. Well, rook e8, we can just snap it off. Rook d8, rook f4. If rook g8 here, not queen h6 g5, but actually in this position, rook h4, and again we can't really defend this threat here. Yeah, so the point is, I mean, this is just for those technically interested. Rook f4, you might think in this position allows queen d8. This is the technical point. The queen can come back like this now. So rook, yeah, it's crazy, but that's like the only defensive move. I thought I'd just go over this. This is actually technically defending, believe it or not. So it seems, yeah, black with the move rook fb8 is technically equal, even at this critical point, defensively. So just to recap, rook g8, rook f4, queen d8 would fail here because of rook h4, queen f8. Here, there's rook h6 with the idea of queen h4 next. How does black defend here? Impossible. Black would have to give up the rook. So yeah, okay, so that's why it's a really difficult position to defend. Paul Keres just blows up here instead. Pardon me. He plays b3. It's not helping. Although it's a slight distraction, as if the pawn's queen and it's taken care of. A takes. Queen b4. B takes c4. Queen takes a4. And now, of course, we have the mechanism Queen h6, Rook g8, Rook f4, g5, right? But the thing is, Rook f4 is played first. No time for this g5 resource. It's blocked. The queen is blockading the g5 defense. And it seems, what about Queen c2 hitting the rook? Guess what white plays here? If I give you 5 seconds, starting from now. You might want to pause the video. So you should be able to see this given what I've said about the mating patterns, I hope. Queen h6. Doesn't matter about the rook. Black resigns here. If he takes the rook, how is he defending? How is Black actually defending? Yeah. Defends this. It's token defense. We have Queen takes h7 now. That lovely mating pattern with Rook h4. Checkmate. It's a beautiful example, this game, of this form pawn on f6 actually, with that lovely queen sack mating pattern, which I hope many of you have seen before. It's something I try and use in games. It's a nice one when you have a form pawn on f6. But the issues revolving around it I thought were fascinating, how Black could actually technically defend, the possibilities. But the thing is, Black shouldn't be putting himself in a position as a human player to have to find the only defensive move. It's terrible that if one is in a position to have to play that accurately. So earlier, the more practical choice would have been simply to just try and sack the exchange. Black was already a pawn up, so it would have been an exchange for 2 pawns. So it seems at a critical moment from an engine point of view, at least, give up the rook, just play knight takes b2. But all in all, what do we learn from this game? This gambit clearly has got something going for it. Something very, very creative about the classic downside of f5 weakening e5 was challenged in this game with this technical move, bishop a4. It caused Black some troubles. Maybe the rook should have just gone to e7, which is the most natural place, instead of going back to f8. But clearly, when Black allowed this dangerous pawn here, he was running out of defensive options. The accuracy requirements were going up and up. Fascinatingly, I did an overall accuracy check of White's play, and it's like 11 average centre pawn loss. David Bronstein played this game exceptionally accurately. So I think it is a very instructive attacking game against another attacking player, Paul Keres. I hope you got something out of it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.